Welcome back to XRP Unfiltered. Before anyone starts to panic, take a step back and zoom out with me for a moment. Yes, we are seeing a pullback today. Yes, inflation printed hotter than expected at 3.3%. And yes, the market is reacting the way it always does when macro data doesn't land perfectly. Short-term fear kicks in. Roughly 5% has been shaved off XRP. Around $100 million has been liquidated across the crypto market in the last 24 hours. And suddenly, social feeds are filled with doom-filled posts acting like the sky is collapsing. This is not new. This is not unusual. And this is not the signal most people think it is. Here is the uncomfortable reality that most traders don't want to accept. Volatility like this is the cost of admission in this market. Every cycle follows the same script. Inflation data spooks participants, leverage gets flushed, weak hands are shaken out, and real positioning continues quietly in the background. If a 5% move triggers an emotional reaction, you are not thinking like capital, you are thinking like liquidity. What we are witnessing right now is not a structural failure. It is a short-term volatility event layered on top of a market that was overcrowded with over-leveraged longs and shorts. Fresh money enters, tries to play smart with leverage, and the market quickly reminds them who controls the game. That is not bearish. That is the market resetting itself. And every time this happens, people mistake noise for narrative. This is where XRP holders need to be especially disciplined, because XRP has a unique way of testing patience. When price pulls back, commentary intensifies. When price consolidates, critics appear. And when macro fear shows up, people suddenly forget why they were holding in the first place. If your entire thesis falls apart because inflation printed a few tenths higher than expected, then you never had a thesis. You had hope. And here is the key detail most people are missing today. None of this short-term volatility changes what is being built around XRP. Not the pullback, not the liquidations, not the inflation scare. Those are surface-level reactions. The real developments are happening underneath, quietly, far away from retail panic. This is exactly the type of environment where serious positioning takes place. While people complain about red candles, institutions are focused on infrastructure, regulation, and settlement layers, not 5-minute charts. They care about what can scale, what can comply, and what can move value when conditions tighten. That is where XRP becomes relevant in a way most traders still do not fully understand. Instead of asking why price is down today, the better question is what is being prepared for next. Because short-term volatility does not stop long-term capital flows. It often comes before them. And if you do not understand that distinction, the market will teach it to you the expensive way. Now that we have filtered out the noise, we need to talk about what actually matters, the public XRP ledger, central banks, and why the infrastructure narrative is far bigger than most people realize. Let's move away from price action and into the part of the story that truly drives markets over time, infrastructure. While most people argue over red candles, Ripple is sitting at tables most crypto projects will never be invited to. One of the most important of those involves the Central Bank of Singapore and an initiative known as Project Guardian. This is where confusion among XRP holders still lingers, and that confusion is costing people conviction. There is a lazy narrative suggesting banks will only use private chains, making the public XRP ledger irrelevant. It sounds reasonable on the surface, but it falls apart once you understand how modern financial systems actually operate. Project Guardian is not theoretical. It is not a someday pilot. It is a real initiative backed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, one of the most respected and forward-thinking regulators globally. In their own documentation, they explicitly reference public blockchains like the XRP ledger as compliant infrastructure for institutional finance. That matters because public chains used to be viewed as the problem. Regulators did not trust them. Banks avoided the risk. Compliance was difficult. That landscape has changed. The XRPL now supports counterparty verification, fraud mitigation, defined transaction reversibility, and secure digital identity solutions. These are not crypto buzzwords. These are banking requirements. Interoperability is the real breakthrough. Financial institutions do not operate in isolation. Capital moves across networks, borders, and asset classes. A public chain that enables interoperability rather than fragmentation becomes exponentially more valuable. That is exactly what the Singapore Central Bank is emphasizing. Reduced fragmentation, cross-platform integration, and seamless asset movement. That is institutional language, not retail hype. And here is the part that should really make people pause. Central banks do not waste time evaluating technology that cannot scale. They do not care about community sentiment. They care about settlement, compliance, and efficiency at scale. If the XRPL public chain were irrelevant, it would not be part of the discussion. The idea that only private ledgers matter collapses here. Private systems still require public liquidity rails, bridges, and neutral settlement layers. That is where the XRPL fits, not as speculation, but as connective tissue for global finance. When you hear public chain, do not think chaos. Think regulated access, interoperability, and scale. That is what is being built. And when a central bank like Singapore validates that direction, it is not coincidence. It is a signal. Now let's talk about the numbers that put this into perspective. Tokenization is projected to bring nearly $19 trillion onto public blockchain infrastructure in the coming years. Trillions, not billions. This is where people underestimate XRP. Not because they doubt tokenization, but because they assume XRP will not benefit meaningfully. That assumption fails once you understand positioning. XRP sits at the intersection of payments, liquidity, compliance, and settlement. Tokenization without settlement is meaningless. Tokenization without liquidity is fragile. Tokenization without regulatory alignment fails. That is why institutions are not just looking for blockchains. They are looking for rails that already align with their needs. XRPL does. Zooming out globally, Japan is heating up. SBI, one of Ripple's most powerful partners, is exploring ETF structures and accumulation strategies reminiscent of institutional Bitcoin strategies, adapted for a different asset. That is strategic accumulation, not speculation. Singapore is signaling similar intent through Project Guardian, different geography, same direction. Assets that cannot integrate into this system do not get a second opportunity. XRP is not competing for popularity. It is positioning as infrastructure. Infrastructure does not need hype. It needs adoption. Even a fraction of those trillions flowing through XRPL liquidity would fundamentally change supply and demand dynamics. That is how asymmetric outcomes are formed. The public versus private chain debate has held many people back. In reality, private and public chains are complementary. Banks need controlled environments with access to global liquidity. XRP was designed to bridge that gap. Private ledgers handle internal processes. Public ledgers handle settlement and neutrality. One without the other fails. That is how financial infrastructure already works. Central banks discussing public blockchains is a sign the conversation has moved forward. XRPL has been preparing quietly for years. Bringing this together, short-term pullbacks and macro scares do not change where XRP is going. They change who gets shaken out along the way. We are in a pre-positioning phase. Regulatory clarity is emerging. ETFs are a matter of timing, not possibility. When flows arrive, they arrive in waves. These quiet price zones are where accumulation happens. 5% pullbacks feel dramatic up close, but they are insignificant on multi-year adoption curves. Discipline separates holders from tourists. XRP is built to settle value at scale, not chase hype. That is why central banks are paying attention. That is why trillions in tokenized assets are being discussed. Volatility does not invalidate the thesis. It reveals who the market is trying to remove. The goal here is not hype, it is preparation. That is why education, self-custody, and understanding volatility matter. This market rewards patience and knowledge. The bottom line is simple. Hold with clarity, not emotion. Expect volatility. Understand what you own. And remember that the biggest moves build quietly while most people are distracted. None of this is financial advice. Crypto is volatile and risky. Do your own research, manage your risk, and make decisions that fit your situation. Stay focused, stay patient, and know exactly why you are holding.